The dog had belonged to her husband first. Bernard had brought him home 12 years ago, a 3-year-old rescue from the county shelter named Chester, and Chester had been Bernard's dog in the way that some dogs attach to one person and regard everyone else as pleasant but secondary. He had slept on Bernard's side of the bed and followed Bernard from room to room and greeted Bernard's return from work with the specific ceremony of a dog for whom each return is notable. Bernard died in the spring of last year. Chester was 12, which the veterinarian told Eleanor was advanced for a dog of his size, and he had been slowing down since the fall. But he was alive, and he was in the house, and he had reorganized himself in the weeks after Bernard's death in a way that Eleanor had thought about many times since. He moved to her side of the bed. He started following her from room to room. He started greeting her return from the grocery store, the doctor's appointment, the neighbor's house for the afternoon, with the specific ceremony he had previously reserved for Bernard alone. She was 73 years old. She was a grandmother of 4. Her youngest grandchild, 2-year-old Gracie, came to stay with her for a week, while her parents, Eleanor's daughter and son-in-law, attended a work conference in Phoenix. Chester's behavior during that week was what Eleanor's daughter Deborah called, when Eleanor tried to explain it over the phone, sweet. Eleanor said, "That is not the word I would use. If you stay for stories about what animals sense before we do, you are in the right place. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one." The word Eleanor would have used was purposeful. Chester spent the week in a state of sustained, quiet purposefulness, sleeping outside Gracie's room at night, following the toddler through the house during the day at a distance of 3 feet, positioning himself between Gracie and the back door when Gracie showed interest in the yard. He had never done any of this before. He was 12 years old and arthritic in both hips, and he was doing it now. The incident happened on the 4th night. Gracie had a fever. Eleanor had checked at bedtime, and it was 99.8, which was low enough that she had given the child ibuprofen and put her to bed and planned to check again in 3 hours. She set an alarm. She woke to Chester. Not the alarm. The alarm had not gone off yet. Chester was at her bedside, which he had been doing since Bernard died, but he was standing rather than lying, and he was making a sound that was not quite a bark and not quite a whimper, something between them, sustained and directed at her. She got up. She went to Gracie's room. The temperature had risen to 103.2 in the time since she had checked. Gracie was restless and whimpering in the specific way of a sick child who is not quite awake and not quite asleep. She called Deborah. She called the pediatric nurse line. She spent the next 2 hours managing a fever that came down with the second dose of ibuprofen, and that the nurse line confirmed was not at a level requiring emergency care, but was at a level requiring monitoring. She was awake until 4. Has your dog ever done something that made no sense until it was the only thing that made sense? Tell us in the comments. These stories deserve to be heard. Deborah flew home the next morning. She sat in Eleanor's kitchen with a cup of coffee and listened to the whole story and said, "Chester woke you up," Eleanor said. "How did he know?" Eleanor said, "I have been thinking about this. Dogs have been sleeping beside humans for 40,000 years. They have been registering human temperature changes for all of those years. It is what they have been doing in the night for 40,000 years. I think Chester simply knew what he had always known, and this week he was responsible for communicating it because Bernard is not here." Deborah was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I don't know if that's the right explanation." Eleanor said, "I don't know either. I know he woke me up an hour before the alarm went off, and I know that when I checked her temperature it was 103.2, and I know that when she came home, the pediatrician said we had managed it well. That is what I know. Every guardian deserves to be recognized. even the ones who never asked for anything in return. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Gracie went home at the end of the week. Chester went back to following Eleanor through the house and sleeping on Bernard's side of the bed, which was Eleanor's side now, which she had not fully settled on thinking of it as yet, but which Chester had apparently already settled. She had lived with Bernard and Chester for 9 years before Bernard died. She had watched Chester be loyal to Bernard with the total, uncomplicated devotion of a dog that has made a decision and is not revisiting it. She had envied it a little, the clarity of it. Then Chester had reorganized himself. He had transferred the full weight of whatever he carried in that loyalty to the next available person. And the next available person was Eleanor, and the next available person who arrived in the house and required monitoring was Gracie. And Chester had, without instruction, without discussion, without apparent effort, assessed the situation and extended his care accordingly. She thought 12 years old and arthritic and still keeping his house in order. She thought Bernard would have liked knowing that. She thought she would have liked telling him.